And this time, since the freeze dryer trays are already in the freeze dryer, I'm going to pre-freeze them in these small pans like I've been doing a lot. And so I'm going to kind of show the pre-freezing process using these pans. And the main reason I use these pans is kind of, I guess, a couple of reasons. One is these are a nice size to hold in the freezer for long term. Sometimes we've had 100 of these little blocks in the freezer. So after they're frozen, we can pop them out, put them in a Ziploc, and wait until their turn in the freeze dryer. And we've had 100 of these blocks waiting their turn. And 2.5 of these, or slightly less than half, fit the freeze dryer tray of the medium machine perfectly. It has to be a little bit less because 2.5 doesn't quite fit. That's why this is about a 1/2 inch thick. So you take a little bit less than half and then 2 of these. It's a perfect fit for the tray. So we'll get these going and then I'll show you how we put them in the freezer. Okay, so that gives a pound of pears in one of these pans, and then it can be pre-frozen in here and then popped out and put on the tray. And of course you can go directly onto the trays if you have extra trays, or if you're processing them slow enough to wait for the trays to be empty each time. And for pears or pieces of stuff that's this sizes, it does work very well to put them directly on the trays, because these are going to end up being a little taller to make it work. But that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to go ahead and put one of these stainless steel rods in here. Let's see if we can set that in there somewhere so that later we'll be able to put the thermometer in that space. Now make sure I have the scale zeroed and not touching the pan. And then make sure we have everything stirred up nicely and get a scoop of it. Now we want 8 ounces on each side. Make sure I have it on ounces. So when I end up with the stew usually going slightly heavy, I mean parts of a gram or parts of an ounce. This is about a 1/2 ounce heavy, but that's not a big problem. Then when I call it a pound later and put that amount of water in, it'll just leave it a little bit thicker, which is just fine. Now this one's ready to go to the freezer and be pre-frozen. Make sure that always make sure that it's kind of stirred up. I want to try to get an even mix of pieces and the sauce part. 16 ounces. Okay, so again, that's ready for pre-freezing. All right, and I don't need to pack this down very much either. It's going to be pretty solid. So that one's ready for pre-freezing. We'll get the other 2 pans. And we've been using this garlic for years, but once you open it, you're supposed to use it in a relatively short time. And as you know, at Costco things, you're getting things in 55-gallon drums, and sometimes it's hard to keep them in the refrigerator and use them up that fast. So freeze drying them gives us time. And I will do the other 2 jars just like that. But the other thing I want to add, one of the viewers had suggested, and I've tested and love it, is for the thermometers, instead of drilling holes into the food, using a stainless steel rod the same diameter as, coat it with a little cooking spray, and then slide it into the food. And I've got this piece of, this was a lid to one of the plastic containers, and so and I can just use that to keep that rod from ending up sinking down in. So now that's ready for pre-freezing and then freeze drying. Now we'll get the little 7x7 pans into the freezer, and I can get at least 24, sometimes 30 pans at a time just for pre-freezing. And then once I pop them out and put them in the Ziplocs, well, then I can put hundreds of them in there. So I already have the first 5 in there, and we'll just continue filling up this space. And then I have some of the corrugated plastic pieces trimmed so that they'll fit in here exactly, and make another layer. And I can put 4 layers in there with no problem, and sometimes 5 if it's just been defrosted. Another reason that I use these is because I have one of the older machines, the freeze dryers, and the tray, the rack is tilted slightly to the back, so I cannot do any liquid items without pre-freezing. So that's when I started doing the pre-freezing. I liked it, and we just do all kinds of pre-freezing now. And here's another shelf full. These are already depanned ones, so there's 4 cubes in here, a half dozen cubes in there, more cubes back there, more back there, or blocks, they're not really cubes, and trays here. These are some of my sisters that she's pre-freezing in our freezer. So a couple of the batches that we've done recently, we've made extras. What we do when we have extras, or when we're ahead, is we simply pop everything out of the pans and put them into Ziplocs and stack up the cubes. By doing it this way, we can end up with a lot of these in the freezer, ready to just pop onto the freeze dryer trays and get a batch going. Takes 8 of these whole size ones and 2 of the half size ones, and that's enough for a whole batch, a freeze dryer batch. So for instance, right here, that's 5 pounds of ground beef, or a half a freeze dryer load ready to go. Suck out the extra air. Got this nice cube, half a freeze dryer load, 2 of these, with 2 of them being the half size ones, 2 sets of blocks, so 4 half size, and you got a whole freeze dryer load waiting. Meatballs. When we did the meatballs, we panned up 12 pans worth, because we weren't really sure when we were going to, how much of them we should use. So we'll get these 2 out, and they can be sitting in there also waiting for the next time or for lunch. So the meatballs with the mushroom sauce, and I use this corrugated plastic stuff just to insulate it so it doesn't warm up on the table. So there's a couple of 1-pound blocks of meatballs with mushroom sauce. So with these and the ground beef, there's 7 pounds right there. There's the leftover crushed tomatoes. These are some half-pound blocks of rice. I already pulled out the divider earlier. These are blocks of cooked rice that were cooked with chicken broth that I pre-froze in the pans with 500 grams in a block. I popped them out and put them in the Ziploc, and then this will go in the freezer and wait their turn for freeze drying. So get it out of the pans and onto the trays. And each one of these was a pound. So if it doesn't work out to 2.5 pounds, it's because I already lost a little bit of weight in the freezer. And then the little half pans. Grab that other half pan and a couple of the whole pans. We'll get them in there. This is the rice that I depanned a while back. Each block is 1 pound and ready to put on there. I might lose a few grains of the rice as I move them. I'm not going to worry about that too much. I'll get them all on there. 2 pounds of the rice, and then I've got the half blocks to fit in between. That's cilantro lime flavored rice from an earlier batch. Tray 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And then move on to the next thing.
I should have started with the fact that pre-freezing is not required for freeze drying. It just speeds up the process and makes it more convenient for us, because then we can choose when we're going to start some of the things in the freeze dryer. We don't have to worry about waiting for the trays if we're making giant batches of something. We just put them in the little pans, pre-freeze them, and then they're ready when we are. Another advantage of pre-freezing is it saves quite a few hours of freeze-drying time. The freezing cycle can take 4 or 5 hours less for each batch if it's already pre-frozen. The pans that we've been using, and the ones that are in this video, are cheap pans from Dollar Tree. Of course, now they're $1.25. But anyway, we've been using these pans for pre-freezing food for many years before we had a freeze dryer, a decade or two before we had a freeze dryer. We find it very convenient for portioning out our freezing. So that way, when we want to thaw some out, is it 2 people eating or is it 4 people eating? You grab 1 block or 2. The blue dividers we use are just some that I designed and 3D printed out of plastic. We made a set for my sister using basically craft items, some foam core and hot melt glue and plastic bag. That worked well. And I'm ashamed to say that I still haven't finished the video for making them out of 1/2-inch thick cutting board, which I think will be a great option for a lot of people. You can also get silicone pans that fit the medium Harvest Right freeze dryer trays really well, but the pans cost a lot more, and because they're not metal, you can't stack them the same way that we've been stacking these. These stack wonderfully. 6 on a layer, put a layer of the corrugated plastic in, 6 more on the next layer. With the silicone pans, the pan is bigger and taller. They don't hold up as well when you stack more things on top of them. And you can't get the same number of layers in the same freezer space because they're just physically bigger. Anyway, I'm cheap. I like the cheap pans.